When I was 10 years old, my favorite video game was Chronotrigger. For those of you, okay, we can give that. For those of you who didn't spend your childhood down in an unfurnished basement, the game saves you time travel throughout history to gather enough strength to stop Lavos, this interdimensional space alien that annihilated the planet in the not-so-distant future of 1999. The game is unique in that you can essentially challenge Lavos at any point, even right from the start. But if you fight it and lose, you don't just get to load a pass save and try it again. No. Instead, the screen goes black. A pixelated representation of the world fades into view, turning from blue-green to a dull crimson, then lifeless gray. A guttural, inhuman gargling screeches out, and white text appears, but the future refused to change. This scared the hell out of me. No other video game ever threatened me existentially before. Like, what do you mean the future refused to change? The ability to change is what makes the future the future. While the past is concrete, a monument to both our heroics and regrets, the future is alive and ephemeral. It is like water. It can take any shape. And like water, without it, it's the end of everything. The last time I believed the future could change was in 2019 when I was volunteering for the Bernie Sanders campaign. You're never supposed to feel like a political campaign can change the world. I learned that the hard way after Obama refused to close Guantanamo and bailed out the bankers responsible for the '08 crash. But I let myself feel hopeful because I knew what was on the line. The first Trump term had broken everyone's brains. Even the most hardened centrist voters seemed ready to embrace a little socialism if it meant getting Trump's stupid smirk off the New York Times. There was an opportunity here to wrestle power back from Lavos, from the conservative ghouls and the feckless liberals, and make this country a more just, equitable, and peaceful place. Though this was my first time volunteering for a campaign, I had been very left-wing since 9/11, not long after Fukuyama's End of History excitedly promised a future that would refuse to change. Unlike most of the adults I knew, I didn't think my Muslim friend hated freedom and wanted me dead. He just wanted to listen to Through Being Cool by Saves the Day and maybe sip a little vodka from his water bottle during math class. I'm from Pakistan, he said, after some moron called him a terrorist. Not Afghanistan. But it didn't matter. They still called him slurs. The future refused to change. So we formed a band and smoked weed and listened to David Cross's Shut Up You Fucking Baby, which was one of the few left-wing pieces of art that I knew at the time. We said, fuck George W. Bush, fuck every single Republican. And I promised I would never vote for someone who helped start the Iraq War. Incidentally, I broke this promise in 2016 to vote for Hillary Clinton in the general because I thought Donald Trump would be the end of everything. And Clinton at least represented some kind of path forward. But the future refused to change. So back in 2003, all I talked about was how we shouldn't go to war. I remember my uncle telling me that if I hated America so much, I should leave. I told him I wouldn't hate America so much if people like him left instead. I wrote a letter to my senator, John Corzine, urging him not to vote for the Patriot Act. He wrote back to me that he heard my concerns, but he voted for it anyway. It would make America safer, he lied. Or maybe he really believed that the government needed to detain immigrants indefinitely without due process or cause. It didn't matter. I hung the letter on my wall because even though I was powerless, I knew I was right. But the future refused to change. So when you're text banking, you have to rank everyone's response from 1 to 5. 5 being, yes, they couldn't agree more, they're signing up to volunteer themselves, and 1 being disengaged, this person is slightly to the right of Mussolini. The number one rule, they told us, is never argue. If someone wants to drag you into a debate about taxes or the border or that Bernie made $1 million in book sales, so how dare this Jewish hypocrite suggest that the top marginal income tax rate go back to what it was during the 70s, you put them down as a 1 and you move on. And while I encountered a lot of jerks, someone inexplicably called me the N-word. And one guy delighted in spoiling Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker for me. Other than that, the response was mostly positive. People thanked me for my service, and I felt like a Marine. I was fighting Lavos. Once you text bank for long enough, you can apply for advanced text banking, which is where you're allowed to persuade 2s and 3s and try to bump them up to 4s or even, honest to God, 5s. I took this unpaid position more seriously than any other job in my life. I came to every persuasion session with summaries of articles I read, all my little research. I had one fact that I loved. And Medicare for All would save the average American family over $5,000 a year due to decreased premiums and insurance costs. $5,000 is a nice vacation with your family, I would text. I don't know about you, but I'd rather spend a week on the beach eating lobster than handing a check to Kaiser Permanente. This was usually when they respond with their own health insurance horror story. Everyone has a health insurance horror story in America because private health insurance is evil. But I will never forget the response I got from this one guy. Will illegals get it? I was stunned. It doesn't matter, I replied. You'll be saving money. But will illegals get it too? The future refused to change. So I canvassed. I've always felt uncomfortable introducing myself to people. If they wanted to talk to me, surely they would have introduced themselves to me already. But I got over my own shit and I knocked doors. The Bernie 2020 strategy was to register swarms of non-voters, people who had given up on thinking government could ever work for them. I went to some of the poorest places in Los Angeles, streets that are invisible by design, little pockets of poverty permitted to sustain so long as they don't contaminate the Jenny's ice cream a few blocks away. There was a housing project that smelled like fresh piss. I knocked my first door and a guy in his 20s answered, and there was a wide-eyed little kid cowering behind him. I launched into my spiel and he stopped me right away. Don't come around here anymore, he said, with the weariness of 1,000 lifetimes. We'll never see each other again. We live in the same city, but completely different worlds. There was an apartment complex with dead grass and missing front steps. It was obvious the neglect was a choice. The landlord had to make their profit, and nobody thought these tenants mattered. I talked to them about raising the minimum wage, and they responded in Spanish. I found polite ways to say variations of, Lo siento, I don't speak Spanish. I'm one of the useless canvassers with far more enthusiasm than skill. But if you sign here, we will mail you a ballot and maybe things will get better. Somehow, maybe. One of these women had a teenage daughter. They invited me in. There was a mattress in the living room. The teenager was doing her homework on the floor. She said her mom wasn't good with English, but she'd make sure she vote for Bernie. I didn't have to convince her. This isn't some poverty porn, white savior thing. She told me this with confidence, with indignation and rage. She didn't have to subscribe to Jacobin to know that capitalism fucked her over. What made me a leftist is they called my friends names, you know? On the night of the New Hampshire primary, I was out to dinner with my wife. I told her that if Bernie won this, there would be no stopping him. She told me to tamper my expectations. I told her we had to meet the moment with everything we had because it was this or the end of everything. This was incredibly hyperbolic, but in my defense, think about the Sandong caves in Vietnam. It's the largest natural cave in the world. Everybody else who, upon discovering some very large cave in their neck of the woods, probably thought to themselves, shit, this has got to be the largest natural cave in the entire world. But the person who found Sandong, I mean, goddamn, they were right. But you know the rest of the story. Biden won after assuring his billionaire donors that nothing in America would fundamentally change. It was the one promise he kept. And Lavos, who destroyed the world in 1999 and 2016, came back to destroy it once again. I wasn't completely naive. I didn't think President Sanders would overthrow capitalism. And maybe he would have lost to Trump, and that would have been so much worse. The thing with Lavos is he can regenerate. The secret that took me hours to figure out when I was a kid is you win not by attacking the main body, but by taking out the little guys around the core. But all I've thought about for years now since then is this. As long as we have been alive, the most craven capitalists have taxidermied the future. On our way to work, we walk past its flayed corpse. The homeless encampments, the AI data centers, the cyber trucks with Blue Lives Matter flags, stickers on them. All of them hung up to mock us. We all know that the richest country in the history of the world can eliminate poverty. It just chooses not to. We know no one has to sleep outside. No one has to ration insulin. We know trans rights are human rights and the borders are pretend. But we look toward the future and what gazes back are dead eyes. Because it's not the future that won't change. It's them. It's the men and They're mostly men who think because they have the power to destroy the world, they are indistinguishable from God. They have faces and names, and they own hedge funds. They want Iran and China to come to a heel until we have no more fake enemies left, and then they will make more. They've convinced voters that we can't have it all, so they can have it all. When they speak about illegals or Israel's right to defend itself, they make sounds far more guttural and inhuman than any video game space alien. I've lived through, when you look at policy, 7 separate George W. Bush administrations. They keep regenerating with the same tax cuts and the same wars. But on this point, I am certain the future is aching to change. New Yorkers just elected a socialist mayor in their primary. In LA, normal people took beatings and arrests to protect their neighbors from ICE. This isn't nothing. What makes this game unique is you can challenge Lavos at any time in many different ways. You can march with Palestinian Americans. You can be kind to service workers and callous towards fascists. You can openly say that people like Stephen Miller should die. You should. I hate him. You take out all the little guys surrounding the core, and then who knows? If you can volunteer for something you believe in, do it. At the very least, it'll make you feel less alone. The future may not have changed, but it's not the end of everything until it is. Thank you.